So welcome back, everybody. And I appreciate you putting your information in the chat because, you know, we have been together for quite a long time, but there's a different mix as to who's on some of the original and who's on some of the follow-up. So it's good for people to be able to introduce themselves and just get a little bit of background as to what kind of mix we have on the phone. What kind of mix geographically, what kind of mix in various roles. And that's one of the things that, you know, from the very start, one of the things that in Leading by Convening, we've always, you know, tried to encourage people to do. The sense that, you know, getting a sense of who's on the line, what kind of diversity is in the group, and then being aware if there is an important group that is not included. So, you know, it serves, we're not doing a formal poll on that today, but this idea of introducing yourself in the chat really gives us a sense that we've got some geographic mix, we've got some role mix, so we should have a really interesting conversation today. So one of the things that the first follow-up we had to the Leading by Convening basic training, where we talked about the habits of interaction, the elements of interaction, and the depth of interaction as ways to think about authentic engagement. As a follow-up to that, last time we met, about 2 weeks ago, we did the, you know, we called it good starts. In other words, how you kind of bring people together for the first time. What do you have to be watching for? What do you have to be aware of? How do you go from a nice meeting or a nice call in this case to actually getting people to do something together? So that was last time. And so this time we're gonna take it a little step further. So we're gonna assume that, you know, you've done this this kind of a coalescing, whether it's in a meeting or, you know, as we're doing this virtually, it's coming together around some kind of issue that we all agree on. And you're getting some positive information and maybe even had a little bit of follow-up afterwards. But because, you know, we're not all working in the same place, we're not all working in the same, for the same agency or organization, we're not all coming at this issue from the same role, unless we really attend to keeping that group together and focusing on what they're learning, how they're learning it, what they might want to contribute, and to grow leaders to keep that going, a lot of these collaborations fall apart. So today we're talking about engagement to build sustainability. And for any of you that are on a OMSOS grant or a SAMHSA grant, or, you know, anything from the Department of Ed, when you're taking a look at coming up to the end of your grant cycle, those last couple years, you're always focusing on sustainability. All the grant makers really are pushing you toward thinking about how that work is going to be sustainable. So to a great extent, you know, the work that we're talking about doing together to actually change something depends on somebody making that work their own. And how do we move from being sort of the purveyors of this work to the people that are bringing people in as collaborators and getting them to actually feel that this is their own and take it into their own networks. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Some of the strategies to kind of break into what it's going to take to have that happen, and then some of the tools that you can use to actually, you know, help that happen. Okay, so we're going to introduce a number of tools today, and I put them on the screen. The first one we're going to do is called grounding assumptions. And each of these, I'm going to give you some examples of how they've been used, places that they've been used. Now, some of them are mental health examples. Some of them are mental health crossing over to another issue examples. Some of them are examples from other fields, primarily education, because I do a lot in education. So I'm going to give you some examples of how people use these, and I hope you can see and make some decisions for yourself as to whether you would be able to use this in your work. And one of the things that when I say that, people often say back to me, well, I'm not the one that can make the decision. So I'm asking you to think about this today. Think about yourself as a person that's going to influence these collaborations. So even if you're not the person that makes the decisions, would these tools be useful? You know, how could they be of use in sustaining, building and sustaining the collaborations you're in, okay? So we're going to do these tools. We're going to do grounding assumptions, which is a pretty critical one in the beginning. Then we're going to go into something called defining our core, which is, you know, after people have been working together for a while, do they all have the same picture of why they're there and what they're doing? So defining our core helps you to do that. The next two are focused around a strategy of co-creation. In other words, doing something together for either publication, for use in the field, but it's co-created by people coming together. And actually, the Leading by Convening framework itself is an example of co-creation. Everything in Leading by Convening was co-created. And actually, that's what makes it useful as a document for authentic engagement, because it has not been developed by experts and then just, you know, approved by stakeholders. It was actually developed by stakeholders. So we're going to do two things, you know, from the co-creation perspectives that we use a lot to actually help people feel that this is their work and then to take it into their own networks. So we're going to do co-creation strategies on infographics and dialogue guides. And then we're going to end up with this, it's kind of a fun thing. I mean, the people, it's one of those things that we did as an activity, but it got so much of a great response that we almost do it all the time now. And it's called this quick chronology of change. And it's something that people like doing. It's got a high energy to it, okay? Now, it's a little bit of a challenge to find a way to do it online, but I'm offering to you today, I've been researching it, I'm going to offer you something today and see what you think, because online is going to be your reality for a while. So that's the plan for what we're going to do together today. So let's talk a little bit. You put some of where you were in the chat. Let's talk about what perspective you're bringing to this work today, because the perspective you bring to this work is going to, you know, really have some impact in terms of how these tools would have to be shaped for your use. Okay. So one of the things that we're going to start off with is, what perspective do you bring to this work today? So Jamal, do you want to put that poll up for us? So let's take a look at what perspective you're bringing. And, you know, you might be able to, you might have multiple perspectives. So go ahead and put this in and let's see how we're doing on perspectives. So we have a number of people that, okay, people are really doing it now, really voting now. Good. All right, I think we can close it, Jamal, because I think the ones that are outstanding are probably me and you and Mark. No?
Nope.
Oh. All right. So let's take a look at this. From the responses, we have a lot of people that are working at the county level. And we've got every level represented. The highest one is the county level, but we got a lot of statewide, which should include multiple kinds of perspectives as to where this might be useful. We have a lot of regional. We have a lot of community and family, not so much youth perspective, but we do have some youth perspective represented, so that's good. So think about this as we're going through this today, you know, how these tools might be useful for bringing together some of the people that must work together at your level. So if you're working at the county level, you know, you're talking about community groups, you're talking about other county agencies, you're talking about the schools that are in that county. So how might some of these tools be used to bring these people into these collaborations in a more meaningful way? Okay. All right, so we're going to take one more poll here. And because we're talking about collaborations, let's see how you feel about this one. There it is. Okay. So this poll asked about your experiences in collaboration. And you definitely can check more than one of these. Check all that apply. And if you need to see the screen, this little gray thing over here on your own screen moves it, okay? But we're asking you for your experiences in collaboration. Think back over the times that you've been in a collaboration and how you felt in that collaboration. All right, so let's take a look at these results. Let's take a look at these results. So far and away, everybody has been in a collaboration that has made them feel included. And let's take a look. Almost everybody has been in a collaboration that has made them feel unheard. Let's take a look at some of the others that are quite high. Almost everybody has been in a collaboration where they felt valued. At the same time, a lot of people have been in collaborations that have made them feel marginalized or disengaged. So what does this poll show us? Anybody, any thoughts on this? So when we talk about experiences in collaboration, what does that poll show us? And just from your perspective, what did it show you?
Joanne, this is Dana. I think it just basically shows that it depends on who is in the group and how the collaboration and the perspective everyone brings to it is how you're going to feel in that group, that it's not getting a group together isn't enough, that you have to work to make sure that you're actually collaborating.
Oh, I was gonna die.
Diana, go ahead. Wonderful, thank you.
Sorry, I'm sure you heard my granddaughter. To me, I just look at it and think, well, we've all pretty much been there, done that. For one reason or another, we've either felt like we were of worth or not so much.
Yep, absolutely. So let's take a look. One of the things that that I have felt is that, and one of the things that I have noticed, I don't know why this goes two at a time, but there it is. Okay. So one of the things that that I have felt and that I have noticed, if I've gone into a collaboration where I'm with a number of individuals that are, you know, somewhat in my same environment, sometimes I feel included. Other times, you know, you just feel like it doesn't really matter how many times you're a broken record, you keep making the same point and it's just not heard, right? And so it leads me to say that regardless of our position, our role, or our level of influence, we know what it feels like to be invited, included, and valued. And we also know what it feels like not to be included, invited, and valued. And so one of the things that I like to ask people is, can we take a look and as we start to think about some of these things today, can we start to think about our own experiences and how they enter how they influence the way that we enter the collaborations that we are in? And to what extent some of the tools today might help us to help other people shape those collaborations in a way that make more people feel invited, included, and valued. So this was an interesting one. Last week, or 2 weeks ago when we met, and I showed you those images of collaboration, and I don't think it happened in this group, but it happened in one of the groups that I was working with. They said that this image, which I had never heard before, to them was an image of falling apart. Was this a picture of a collaboration coming together, or was it an image? Is it a picture of a collaboration that's falling apart? Because often we use this idea of a puzzle and puzzle pieces coming together as a way of talking about how much more we could accomplish together. But this person took the other side of it and said, you know, if you don't put some work into keeping the glue among those pieces, everything starts falling apart. So this, I thought, was a pretty good analogy for some of the work we're going to do together today. And it leads me to think about this effort that we put into these collaborations in 3 ways. That we can either let it happen, we can help it happen, or we can make it sustainable. And so that they kind of happen on a trajectory. So if we just let something happen, so we're hoping that a collaboration comes together, we're hoping that people are going to be excited about the new things and the ways in which people are excited about the work they're doing. But that's often not enough. And so, some of what we're going to do today is this help it happen. So if I were going to say, in general, how do you think that the collaborations that you've been in, how do people help it happen? What do you think? Some of the things that you think have been effective or ineffective in trying to help something happen. What's your experience there? Have you noticed anything about what people do to help something happen?
Joanne, this is Mark. One of the things that I think and I see is to really help something happen, for me, is almost first you have to ask for it. You really have to open the dialogue to say that you need help to move something forward.
Very good. Oh, that's absolutely right. So a piece of that is this idea of, opening yourself as a person who's leading a collaboration to letting people know that you're open to taking help, that you're open to partners in this kind of a collaboration. And then, of course, once you start to get that kind of collaboration, that you keep it going so that we make that switch so that people feel that this is their work and the work becomes sustainable. So a lot of what we're going to do today is about this idea of when you see a collaboration in any of those stages, how could some of the things we're going to do today help you? So as you react to these things, I like to see how you think about using these tools in one of these stages of a collaboration, because each of them can be shaped a little bit differently to be used as a collaboration starts, as a collaboration develops, and as a collaboration really deepens. I don't know why this is doing this, but it's, there we go. So one of the things that I wanted to just do before we go back into this is really think about this idea that some of this work we're going to do today is about building these habits of interaction, because the more you do this kind of work, the more natural it becomes, that you actually don't have to think about doing it. It's part of your own habits of interaction, and that being aware of the depth of interaction is really a critical piece in trying to do this work. So one of the things that I did was to take those depths of interaction, and we know that we had on our one of our first meetings, we talked about how do you look at a collaboration, and how do you describe what's happening? So one of the ways in which the stakeholders have developed leading by convening, this is what they call and the way that they look at the depths of collaboration. So early on, somebody's sharing something with you. They're really not asking your opinion. They're just sharing with you. And it's better than not sharing, but not much happens. And the other thing would be they share and they ask. They don't really invite you into anything, but they've shared and asked. And those are the shallow end of collaboration. And in many ways, it kind of goes with the let it happen, right? You're hoping that people catch on to this idea that, you'd like, that you're in this together. You're maybe waiting for them to suggest some ideas, but the let it happen, you're not doing much active to actually grow this kind of work. And then you take the next step. You realize that, okay, some of this depends on some action on my part, and I'm going to help it happen. And for leading by convening, that step is this collaborating step, to be intentional about engaging, to be intentional about working together over time, to be intentional about turning to your partners and saying, what do you think about this? What do you know about this? What would you be willing to do? That's the step where we move from let it happen to help it happen. And when we help it happen so long that it becomes a natural part of the way that we work, we're moving toward making it sustainable. So this is where we've created opportunities for people to tell us. It's natural for them to tell us what's happening, the way they feel about things, what they might be able to do, how they could take this work into their networks. This is the sustainability part of this. So I want to move into one of the areas that's really critical in actually moving even beyond let it happen. Even when we take that first step into building a collaboration, we're feeling good about the people we're working with, but there are always things that are under the surface. And, often we go into a collaboration seeing what's on the surface. And if we don't actually create some activities to understand what's under the surface, we can often get into trouble. So let me just see what you think about this. Any thoughts on this idea about entering a collaboration? Any experiences? Of course, we don't want to know names, no personalizing or that kind of thing, but where you entered a collaboration and all of a sudden, all the things that are underneath start coming up. Anybody have any experiences like that? Is that something that's common?
I actually think it's more common than not, especially depending upon on when you enter a collaboration. If you were there from the beginning, maybe not as much, but if you're coming in because someone saw that your input may be valuable, then there might be some things that start to bubble up that were happening before you got involved, kind of thing. So I know I've been involved in quite a few collaborations of that nature. So
yeah. Others? Anybody else on these assumptions about why people are joining work, what they bring to the work, and then finding out that there's more to it? Anybody else?
I think that anytime we join a group, or even like anytime you're in a social interaction, you bring assumptions into that. So when you join a group, you absolutely, whether you recognize it or not, you're bringing those assumptions. I think for me, what's important is understanding that I know I have assumptions and kind of unpacking them internally so that I can put them, at least acknowledge them, to be able to see what's really happening in the group. But I think I just think the nature of our experiences and what we bring into every group, it's impossible to not have some underlying assumptions.
Absolutely. We make a lot of assumptions about the issue. We make a lot of assumptions about the potential partners, the potential collaborators, and we really make assumptions about what we think those people believe about the issue that we're undertaking together based on our assumption of the group that they belong to. So this idea of, that we have these referent groups and we sort of ascribe beliefs to those referent groups. And when we go into a group, we carry a lot of assumptions about what those groups are going to support or not support. And that's where the tool that we're going to talk about first comes in. So we're going to take a look at a tool called grounding assumptions. And so I'm going to tell you a little story about this so you can get the sense of what this is. I was working in Michigan, and they were trying to help change some of the assumptions about kids with disabilities being in general education. So you can imagine now when you're talking about putting having kids with disabilities as their major assignment being in a general education class, there were some that totally supported that belief, some that, really had concerns about that belief, and a lot of others that thought there was a lot to learn. And the people in Michigan thought that they knew from you know, doing surveys and things like that, what people really believed about this work. And so we had about 125 local leaders, and we did this activity. And I'm going to show you some of the way we did this activity, and hope that maybe this idea, this is where it came, and then I'll show you how we've applied it in other places. So this is where this activity really generated. So the first sense was that we were had this set of beliefs that we thought that people were that was pretty comprehensive set of beliefs. So we wanted to take a look at how well did the things that had been acquired through surveys and other ways, how did that fit with people that were really in the field that were going to have to do this work? How well did that set of beliefs really fit with those individuals? So we had tables of you know, in this particular situation where we generated that, there were probably tables of 10. And what we did was ask those people to generate, you know, 5 assumptions about the work that was going to be done. In the case where we generated this tool, it was on the inclusion of kids with disabilities into general education. So we asked them to generate 5 assumptions, and whether they believed it or not, we asked them to state it in the positive, okay? So we're gonna state this in the positive. So if the belief was that, that general ed teachers were not able to teach kids with disabilities, all kids with disabilities, that you'd ask them to state that in the positive, that general ed teachers can teach kids with disabilities. So in this case, all the assumptions were generated in the positive. And then you go around and you ask for each table, you're asking them, of the 5 that they generate, rank your top 3. So there's some forced discussion there to generate 5, another forced discussion to rank the top 3. So these assumptions are now coming to the top. And then you go around the room and you ask every table for their number 1. And in this case, I put it on a screen, on a Word document on a screen in the front of the room. And so when you're going around the room, by the time your second time around, people are saying, oh, well, we already had that one, so then you don't put it up again. But you're making them aware just how often these same assumptions are generated by various groups. And by the third time around, you're really hearing that you know, we said that too. Oh, we said that almost the same way. So you can be pretty sure by your third time around the room that if you're getting that kind of response, you are getting the top kinds of assumptions about a particular group, okay? So most likely you'll have between 10 and 12 assumptions. In the case where we first developed this tool in Michigan, we had 16. What they did in Michigan was then we had these 16 assumptions, and the people that were in that group rated them, which ones they were, that they and their colleagues would be most likely to agree with and least likely to agree with. So we came out with this, this set of new set of information on what the people in the room that were working at the ground level felt about these 16 assumptions that were pretty widely held by the people that were trying to implement this change, right? And so that group took these 16 assumptions, and they went back to their areas and they ran this same activity with their own groups. Only this time they didn't generate them. They took the 16 assumptions that were generated at that table, and they went out to their groups and they asked them, which ones do you and your colleagues most agree with, least agree with? And then brought that information back. And what they found was that there was a tremendous amount of assumptions about what people knew, what they believed, what they were willing to do, that was a mismatch, a real mismatch to the way that the state agency was presuming that that level of agreement or disagreement based on some of the things where they had talked only to leadership. So this was a good example of a need and how a tool in leading by convening got developed in response to a need. I want to show you how this became used. And I think Mark was there for this one, and a number of people from Pennsylvania that happened to go to the Federation Conference in Texas 2018. So if you remember back to 2018, Texas had tremendous flooding and hurricane and flooding, and there was, schools were closed, whole school, people lost their homes and moved, so the population was shifting. And there was an expectation that the increase in trauma, both on the part of youth and families, much of what we're going to face here after the COVID stay-at-home work required them to think about crossing some of the school-based programs with the community-based programs. So we held a session at the Federation Conference, and we invited all the TA centers that trained on mental health. We invited all the family centers to come. We invited the state agency to come. And then we had a lot of people that were at the conference. Mark and Corey came from Pennsylvania. People came from other states. And they had this conversation about the extent to which, what it was going to take to cross the school-based positive behavioral supports together with the community mental health. And so these are the assumptions that they generated. So there were 10 of them, and you could see how some of those things came to the top. And then what they did was, just as I was telling you how this developed, we rated from those 10 assumptions, we rated the ones that were the most and least, had the most and least agreement. Because if you're going to cross those groups from the school-based group to the community-based group, we really needed to know, among the people that actually do the work, where is there real agreement on some of these assumptions? Now, some of them, are pretty well understood if you're in one situation or another. If you're in the mental health world and you're asking about the extent to which people believe that trauma is related to behavior, in the mental health world and your experiences, you might say, I don't agree that people understand that that's related to behavior. In the school-based world, where they're getting a lot of training on this, they think, yeah, I get that. They may not get it in practice, but they respond to it as though they think they get it. So this idea, we played it out on a flip chart, and the tables had to take a look at those 10 assumptions, and they reported the ones that, first of all, they're looking at the ones with most agreement. Again, it's mixed groups. And so they had to talk about them, and they're rated their top 3. Which are the ones where there is the most agreement? And then again, they go back and the rate, where's the least agreement? But those conversations generate so much that, when people come up and put those X's on there, either in green or red, to designate agreement or disagreement, there's so much that they want to share that the conversation really does go on. So, I don't know what happened here, Jamal, but it moved. Can you help me move that back? There you go. Nope. There you go. One more. There it goes. Okay. So there's a flip chart in the front of the room, and people are coming up and they're putting on X's, and other people at other tables are saying, oh my gosh, we had the same thing, or we didn't have that at all. And this actually does create that kind of energy, because people are moving around. They're up there putting the X's on the chart. They're coming back to the room and saying, did you see, or coming back to their table and saying, hey, did you see what that group said? Like they agreed with us, or they really disagreed with us. So this generates a lot of conversation. So one of the things that you can do is, it doesn't always have to be the most or least agreement. You can say the most or least understood, which, you know, has got some relevance. The most and the least be able to be influenced by the group of people in this room, like, you know, help them figure out what they could really do. You can change that with the situation, but the idea is to generate it and then get them as a group to identify the ones that you've generated, the most highly identified, get them to identify which ones have the least and the most of, you know, agreement, understanding, whatever, by the groups that they represent at that table. So this one was really quite an interesting one, because you can see there, as you start to debrief that, take a look at those X's. This is a sample of the flip chart that was developed here at this meeting. So if you were going to look at that, the X is representing the most agreement, and the green X is representing the most agreement, and the red X is representing the least agreement. What would you say about that? If that data was in front of you, what kind of assumptions would you make about the things that were generated? Any thoughts on that? Take a look at 2 and 10, all green X's. What do you think? What do you think that indicates?
I would call that low-hanging fruit.
Absolutely. So these are the ones that, absolutely, very well said. This is the low-hanging fruit, regardless of what group you were in. You're saying you and the people that are your colleagues agree with that statement. So it leads to something that is exactly low-hanging fruit. If you construct an activity that is based on one of those assumptions, you're likely to have a lot of support. Okay, so let's take a look at, that's got like number 6. 1 green and a number of X's. What might that tell you? Anybody?
I would probably stay away from that, because, you know, 3 to 1, not the best ratio in the world. And I'd be fascinated to know what in the world was 3 and 5.
3 and 5, yes, absolutely. So look at that, 3 and 5. That means that never rose to the top. It never rose to the top. When they had to choose the top 3, they may have total agreement with that, but it never rose to the top. So let's go back one and see what 3 and 5 were. There it is. Okay, so there's 3. Good mental health is strengths-based. Why would that not raise to the top? Probably because they were more concerned about sharing their discussion around stigma. And look at 5. All mental health challenges do not present as a behavioral concern. Seems pretty straightforward, but it never rose to the top of their top 3. So let's go back to this, because, you know, Diana brings up a good point. The things that that do not go to the top deserve some kind of real reflection on that. What does it tell you that nobody ranked that in their top assumptions, even though it came to the top when you were generating those assumptions? And then look at the ones that have, like, look at number 9, an equal number of green X's and red X's. Sometimes the ones that have both green and red really tell you that there is something there you got to figure out, because you're going to hit that iceberg. There's something there underneath the surface. If it has been identified as the most and the least, you haven't uncovered yet what it is that is really at the heart of that issue. So this is a way for you to take a look at facilitating this discussion, which sometimes can be tough, because in the normal conversation, the way that we normally conduct some of these convenings, this stuff doesn't come out till way until you're into something, or it flares up in the beginning and people never move beyond that. Using this grounding assumptions tool is a way to acknowledge that on the surface, we really think about some of these things in the same way, but we need to do more than just think about things on the surface. We want to be able to get into this with each other so that we do something meaningful and that it can actually have some chance to make a difference in our work. So when this group in Michigan, I've showed you two now, one in Michigan, one in Texas. When the group in Michigan, the group that actually created this tool, when they came back and shared what happened in their conversations with their staff, they took those assumptions, they went back, they asked them to rate the most and the least, got some pretty surprising reactions. One person came back, she was a leader of a regional network. She came back and she said, you know what, I got such insight into this because my staff said to me, we never talk about our own practice. Most of these meetings are full of paperwork, like how to fill out this, how to fill out that, interpreting this regulation. It's so infrequent that we actually have a discussion like this about our own practice. And another guy took it to a statewide conference, and he offered it as a session there at this statewide conference, so that the people there at that conference felt like they were giving input into this statewide work. And he came back to the group and said, here's what I found out. When you get pushback, stop right there and do grounding assumptions. Because so many things were raised in a conversation in that kind of forum with so many different groups in the room, that he saw for the first time where some of the pushback was coming from. So a tool like this allows you to just acknowledge in the beginning that there are going to be these differences, and learning about these differences are a natural part of a collaboration. So with all of that, any questions before I leave this one? Again, stakeholder developed tool, not to say that it couldn't be customized in a way that meets your own needs, but certainly something that you could use. Any thoughts on that one? Because as I thought about this, I thought there's so much of grounding assumptions that depends on being face-to-face, and that's not our reality right now. So I looked for a way to do this online, and there's a tool called Padlets, free. You can make 10 Padlets for free, and then there's a low-cost option. And Padlet is just as it sounds. You click on a little, icon, a Post-it note pops up, and you write on it. But then you can choose to do some kinds of activities on the Padlet. So I thought maybe a way to do this was to take something like Padlet, and as people are giving their assumptions from around the room, you can just put them up on a Padlet, and then allow them at the end for people to do a thumbs up or a thumbs down on it, from having that same kind of conversation, a thumbs up or a thumbs down. It's not exactly the same thing as doing the full grounding assumptions tool, but it's an activity that it can be done virtually, and it's free and it's low cost. It's only $8 a month if you choose to use it. There's a ton of things Padlet can do, but it gives you a way to test those assumptions even in a virtual kind of a format. So I gave you the history of this, a look at what the tool looks like, and I gave you an online way to do it. So let me just ask you, what do you think? Do you think, to what extent can you envision using something like this in your work? And again, we're not saying that you have the capability of telling people to use it, but if you could, would you try to use something like this, a grounding assumptions tool in your work? So let's open that poll. Jamal, are you going to open that poll, or do I open that poll? Or Mark open that poll? Mark's opening it, huh? Okay, good. So let's think. To what extent do you think you'd use something like this in your work? So the highest is that that people would be likely to use something like this. So I gave you just an overview of this. I have the whole thing written out, even with a manual of how to debrief it. If you're interested in that, I'll be happy to share that. Jamal will make sure that you have the information on how to contact me after this. We have it all written out as a whole series, even a PowerPoint of how you would, how you'd put it up on the screen and describe what you're going to do as you go through it. So somebody did say that they were unlikely to use it. I don't know if you're willing to unmute and tell us why you think it would be unlikely, but I think it would be an interesting perspective if you're willing to. Anybody? That's okay. Don't worry about it. No problem. But, sometimes people feel that there's a certain kind of security to use a tool like this has to be established before you can use it. So that may be what you were thinking. That's good. Okay. So let's go on to the next one. Get rid of this. And, okay, so absolutely, I'm so glad you like the resources. I will be happy to put it all together and in one packet, or put it in some way, and then we'll be able to take you'll be able to have all of the stuff that that goes with this. Okay. All right. So we're moving on to this collaboration, and people are feeling that they're doing pretty good with this. You've got some sense that people are together in the work, but you always have that stuff on the edge where people are saying to you, I don't get this. Like, I don't exactly get what this is about. I'm not sure. I like it, but I don't know exactly, what the whole thing is. So this is not, unnatural for collaborations. It's actually pretty natural. So one of the things that we did when we were developing the communities of practice was to create a tool called Defining Our Core. And again, as I told you, all of these came up because these are pretty predictable things that happened. So this Defining Our Core was something that all of the teams that were in this community of practice had to do for themselves. They didn't all have to have the same kind of defining our core as a community, because that community had to answer all of their needs. But as a state team, they had to define their core. What was this supposed to be about, and how did they expect it to change anything other than having a good time getting together, right? So these are the questions we came up with, and they're all open-ended statements. We are united in to accomplish this and we'll know when we're making progress when. So the example I'm going to share with you, and Mark and Jamal, you were there for both of these. The example I'm going to share is the Pennsylvania Community of Practice. So last April, we had a community of practice meeting. After about 1.5 years of trying to organize the community, we were still getting, because the grants were changing, people were changing in and out of the community. We didn't always do the best job of explaining everything to everybody, as kind of assuming that they were catching on because they liked what was happening. So we stopped and we did a Defining the Core activity. So I want you to take a look at some of what people said. So now this is the Mental Health Project Directors Community of Practice. So it's the OMSOS and SAMHSA grants that are operating in Pennsylvania. So, and the colleagues that are involved in their grants. So look at some of what they said and see how it fits some of the collaborations that you've been in. Take a look at the way that they described we are. Any thoughts on this? Put it in the chat or just unmute and let us know what you think. But they said, listen to this description. We are, I don't know what happened there. It's moving on its own. Let's go back a little bit. There it is. Okay. So take a look at that first one. We are passionate but siloed leaders who are diverse in representation but have similar roles and goals. To what extent does that fit the groups that you're involved in? Another group at that same meeting said, we're diverse, cross-system collaborators. We're peers who have relationships among ourselves and in an expanding network. So think about that. If this is the way that, that you're defining your participation in a group, you're saying it to the group. You're asking the group, is this fit with the way we see ourselves in this group? Let's take a look at what they said about we are united in. We're united in improving lives through service, understanding one another, and sustaining good work. Improving systems, services and systems for youth and families, opening others to differing pictures and supporting change. Promoting change based on family, youth, lived experience. So you see, right here, you start to see a little bit of commonality around the way that these people are seeing their role, but some differences in what it is, what's holding them together as a group, okay? Let's go down a little bit more to what some of the key things about holding a group together. To accomplish this, now you're asking here at this point, for all the things that you've now said you are and all the things that bring you together, how are you going to leverage all that to accomplish what you need to accomplish? And look what this group said. Take a look at that group of the three things that this group said. And anybody want to share anything that you find interesting or enlightening about some of the comments about the way that this group is going to accomplish their work? Thoughts on that? Take a look at those three statements from three different groups, all potentially in the same, collaboration. Any thoughts on commonalities or lack of commonality that you find interesting? Anybody want to share?
I think it's interesting that they all said in some way that the relationships were important, building the relationship, finding those commonalities, kind of sharing, also a common theme. So
Yeah,
it's interesting.
so Ursula agreed. She put in the chat that she saw this commonality of relationships across all three tables. Look at what that one table wrote, that the relationships are the intervention. So this actually went beyond this idea that we're going to focus on relationships among all the other things we're going to do. This table said, if relationships are the intervention that will create us, that if we don't focus on the relationships, we don't have this collaboration that we think we have. So it was an interesting way to surface some of these conversations and to see the commonality among the people that up to this point have been in a collaboration together for a year. What are they seeing about what it is that holds them together? Now, this last part is really an interesting one. And how do you know when this collaboration is successful? So this particular piece tells us how the individuals in the group are measuring satisfaction with the group as a way to accomplish something, okay? So it's not just satisfaction, it's satisfaction with the group as a way to accomplish what it is they set out to do. They could be really happy with the relationships, but if the relationships don't translate to making some change, you're going to see that this group is basically telling you that they're looking for, these are their indicators of success. So take a look at what they said and see if you see something different about these groups. I mean, there's something pretty significantly different here about the way the groups are looking at success. What do you see in the way that these people that have been in collaboration for a year are defining success? Take a look at that. Somebody want to take a look or somebody want to share their thoughts? You can do it in the chat. You can unmute and tell us. But tell us what you see in those three pieces of data on how people are defining success.
we're almost
Joanne?
all lined up. Number 1, number 2, number 3.
What was that? I'm sorry, Deanna. Number 1, 2, and 3 is what?
Well, it's almost like first, as you're traveling along, the first things that you'll see is the first one. Then you'll see the second one happen. And then ultimately, when you get to the point where you're actually looking at policy change, it's kind of like the pinnacle of any group.
Yeah, perfect. So you imagine. So we don't know. It could be that some of the people that are looking at the first one are new collaborators. Maybe that's how they're defining it. But the potential for, if the group is coming in and some people are really looking for policy change to come from that group, and we're focusing on one of the other two, how satisfied is that person going to be? I think it was Marie. Did you want to add something here? Was that Marie?
Yeah, I was just looking at it as, I can see the order, but I was thinking that everybody had a different way in which they wanted to see the outcome and see how they would be successful.
Yep.
And I think it's probably the perspective of maybe where they sit in their organizations.
Yeah. It probably could be
Yeah.
very well that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But take a look at that. So as you, as a facilitator, they're basically telling you, if I don't get and share resources, then I'm not sure this collaboration is for me, right? That's my indicator of success. The next one is, I'm looking for this group to be regular, to be organized. I want to feel that it's got a structure. That's all about the second one, right? And then the third thing here that they're saying is, I want to see something come from this, right? Otherwise, it's just another group to me, right? Three very different kinds of perspective expressed on a group that has, necessarily gone through changes over time, but has been together for over a year, right? So as they step back and they're taking a look at this, there are very different kinds of things that they have to focus on in terms of meeting these expectations. I would have to say, Mark and Jamal, the two of you know that we have done some of these things after this kind of response. Mark, you want to weigh in on that, like how we took a look at some of this as a way of reshaping some of the structure of that community?
Right, and I think ultimately it just allowed us to really kind of think about where we were and what we really needed to do. And I think the other thing that is really with all of this is it's a never-ending kind of story, that piece, that we always need to kind of go back and look at it and really kind of always look at where the buy-in is. I always look at it as what's in it for me.
Yep, what's in it for me, exactly. Yeah. So, some of what this group did as a way of responding to this kind of information, we made sure that the meetings everybody had an agenda a week in advance, that the meetings are always on the same day at the same time. Everybody has it in their calendar. We have 2 planned sharings every month that people can begin to to decide, do they want it, is that enough for them, or do they want to keep getting together on that issue? So we really did try to address and we coalesced the people around some particular kind of thing that is coming up to make sure that we're showing the potential for this group to have an influence on change. So this idea of stepping back and allowing the group to have a way as a group to talk about what they think that group is and what they're expecting from that group is a good thing. One of the other ways that we did this in a place where this has been implemented on Long Island, I don't know how many of you know this, but the state of New York has probably got for special education, I work in special education, the highest number of due processes complaints in the country. Pennsylvania is not too far behind there, but far and away New York's the most. And other than New York City, the biggest group is from Long Island. So a group of people on Long Island got together with this idea of trying to make a difference, but they all had a different perspective on how to make a difference. And how did they decide what that group was going to really become? They did this exercise with them. And they had, I think there were 80 some people there representing different groups. They all did this exercise. Each table did this exercise. And through that, this group of people that are tackling a huge problem, you know, said the same kind of thing. If we don't see results in this, you know, so what's this group about? There were people that really wanted, just like this group did, they wanted regular meetings, they wanted regular practices. There were other groups that really were not, that was not what was interesting to them at all. They wanted to show that they were having some kind of impact on the Department of Education and the local school districts. That's all they cared about was this. So this group could have been headed for a lot of trouble. Instead, even after a year, people that really disagree are hanging together, and they are in this work with the Department of Ed that a year ago, they were really the dissenters for any kind of work with that Department of Ed. So we'll see what happens, because this COVID situation is certainly going to stir up all that work again. It's going to be really interesting for me to go back to them and see, how does this commitment to work to go forward, how's it hold now that they have this situation on top of that? So I wanted to share that tool with you and make sure that we take a look at this. So again, you know, for you, can you see using a tool like defining your core in your work? And we know that you can't guarantee and you can't make all the decisions as to what people are going to use, but can you see taking a tool like this and using it in your work to come together on what people in that group are really expecting and what they think you're about? This helps me too. I mean, I want to take this back to the group because, you know, it's, if we're not communicating why we develop these tools, then we're missing the boat on it. So, you know, it's very interesting for me to see what you think is useful here. It's, if we don't test usefulness to the people that are intended to use it, then we kind of violated the rules of leading by convening. So let's see what we got here. 14 others. Others, we are 15 now, a couple more votes, and then I think we're pretty close to it. So if you haven't voted, just give us your opinion. You don't have to think deeply about it. Your first impression. Do you see yourself doing something like this? I think we might be there, Jamal. I don't think anybody, there we go. Okay, so again, you know, we don't have anybody that are thinking it's unlikely. The idea here for us would be, how can we make this, how can we help you to put something like this into your practice so that it becomes more likely that you would do this and do it over time to make sure that the group is kind of with you. But okay, thanks for sharing this. That's very good. Great. Anybody have any thoughts on that before we leave defining our core?
I don't know if anybody's brought this up, but some of the most fractious situations come up in church at council meetings, frankly.
Yeah.
And people can be very passionate about what they think one way or the other.
Yeah.
Some people tend to think that if, you know, people that go to church are like, oh, you know, everything's all rosy. Not so much always. So I could really see this as being a, not only would it work, but I think it would throw some people off their intended response, because it would kind of channel. It was kind of like, it's like somebody taking your breath away real quick, you know, like, oh, wait, okay, what are we doing here? I mean, it's an interrupter of what may be normal, run of the mill, like, oh no, here we go again. It would just, I could see it serving many different purposes in situations that tend to, we all know how they're going to play out. I hope I said that okay.
I like the way you phrased that, Diana. It's an interrupter. It does. It makes you think about, you know, it's not like, of course I'm in on this issue. Yeah, definitely I have to be in that group. It makes you think about what are you in that group for? And to realize that not, you know, oftentimes we think if we came to a group that probably everybody came to that group for the same reason. And defining our core really lets you know that not everybody in this room came here for the same reason. Not everybody in this room is going to stay here for the same reason. And it's really, it's kind of a, you know, it's a foundational tool for being able to see the group health, really, you know? So thank you for that. Yeah.
Joanne, can you speak a little bit more to when you did that activity with the mental health project directors? Did they each fill it out individually, and then in groups you tried to narrow it down? How did you narrow it down to 3 bullets for each of those questions? Because depending on the size of the group, I could imagine very diverse answers.
Yeah, I think we had, what did we have, like 40 people at that meeting? Jamal, you ran one of those groups. Mark, you ran another one, these tables. And I don't know if anybody else in the room, Monica, you were there for this too, as well. So if you remember correctly, we had about 40 people that day, and we had them at 7 or 8 tables. So they had a certain amount of time to come up with this. And then again, just like we did with the grounding assumptions, you know, people came around and said, this is what I think we're about. We put it up on a chart and we said, is that the same thing this group said? And we kind of recast it there, you know? And so we went all the way around the room so that not only did we get, you know, the words that they said, but other tables said, we said something like that, only we said it this way. So we took those 2 things and we put it in a way that that people were comfortable with it. And then we gave it back to them actually in a call in, I don't know, much later. You know, we came back with that as we started this year and said, you know, here is some of what we said. Remember, this is what we said we were about. This is what we said that this was the core. This is how we're going to respond to what you told us. As we started this particular year, we went back to that and said, okay, does it fit with what you told us? You know, are we hitting the points that you said you expected as going through this? Did that answer your questions, Roberta?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, good, great. So, because in debriefing, these things are important, you know. Too often people come to a meeting and you do something like this and you really don't debrief it. So you don't know what anybody got out of it. You know what you got out of it, but you didn't, you know, you didn't debrief it with people, all right? So we've been going for just about an hour now, and we have a number of things to do. So I want to just kind of stop for a minute and say, does anybody have anything that's really bothering them that you just kind of not seeing like why we're doing this or how we're doing it? Anybody, is there anything that anybody wants to add before we go on? Because we're going to make a pretty big leap here into this idea of co-creation. We're okay? All right. So one of the things I'm going to talk to you about here is this underlying belief in co-creation. And as I said, leading by convening is a co-created tool. This was not developed by a center, you know, looking at all the literature out there and then turning it out. This was developed because of people coming together and saying, this is what we need to get over this problem. And then we created a tool. So one of the belief here is co-creation, that's a core belief, that, you know, you don't get 2 or 3 people and put something out. You do it, everything is constructed because of the experience of the people in the room. So it's a core belief, and 2 of the things that we did were to take infographics, and then we built dialogue guides around those infographics, and we tried to link the two things, co-creating an infographic, co-creating a dialogue guide to help more people be able to lead those conversations and to take this into their own work. So infographics, many of you know about infographics. I mean, infographics have been quite popular lately, where you take this complex information and you're conveying it really simply. So, you know, you see a lot of that with COVID-19, people taking really complex medical information that, you know, when you're listening to it on the news, you're like, nobody's going to remember that. And people take it and they put the highlights of it into a highly motivating format, and they create an infographic, right? And so when you're talking about the structure of leading by convening, it's really got two purposes. It's about conveying the information, but it's about creating opportunities for people to lead or co-lead this effort, right? So the idea is once you create an infographic, what do? Put it up on somebody's website? If you're in a group like a group that's led by leading it by convening, that's one thing you do, but it's not the only thing you do. You're asking people to take that into their networks and do something with it. The tipping point comes not in creating it. That's a good engagement activity. The tipping point on change comes when they've participated in this. They own it. It's theirs. And it's not just on somebody's website. They own it. They can take it into their networks. They've got sufficient experience with the topic now that they can take that infographic into their own networks and actually hold those conversations with their own networks. One of the things that I've been trying to point out to schools is that, you know, we know that about 50% of the kids across the country are not logging on to online education. So why are they not logging on? Because we don't have relationships with those communities, with the families in those communities. And so if we involved many people into doing an activity like this, like infographics, where they got a chance to be in there on the conversation, they're learning about the content, they're helping to shape the content in the way that people in their networks talk about things. And then you've got somebody that can go out, that's in those networks, that can go out. And so when we have and can start to be a person that can share that work. If we had been doing this in schools with developing these kind of linkers in neighborhoods and in groups that typically don't freely affiliate with schools, we wouldn't have had this situation, because there would have been a couple people that we could have reached out to that have been in groups like this, that we invite into co-creation activities. And in doing that, they have the sense of being able to convey things simply and take it out into the networks. It becomes a natural kind of way for interacting. So I don't know, I've kind of pushed this with some of the groups coming out, that if there's a big lesson to be learned here, it's that one of the things we have to do is make sure that we find these ambassadors in every group, and we start bringing them in like this. So we're never in this situation again where we do not know, we don't have those links to people that are respected and connected in these communities that schools really are not connected to. So that's going to be my case as we start to go back here, as a lesson that I'm hoping that systems will listen to and maybe take some action on. And this will be one of the ways that we go forward. So here's a sample. Now we went over that Texas situation, right? So we had those 10 beliefs. We had the grounding assumptions as to where there was support, where there wasn't support. What did they decide to do coming out of that? This is what they decided to do. They did this simple infographic template, not to say this will be the last one they ever do, but it's the simple one that they could do coming out of this. They took a 5-part infographic and they took that data, and together they came up with simple messages that went into these 5 things. The first one is, okay, from the stuff we heard here, what's the need? Quite simply, what's the need? And again, it's the example here is crossing the bridge from school-based mental health to community mental health. That's the emphasis here. So what's the need? So, you know, they were putting in things there like the fact that after the flood, the incidence of mental health issues went up by 30%. They were talking about the number of families that were new into their communities and were there with no connections. That's what they had under the data, right? They chose that. Then the next one is this connection, you know, what it should be between school-wide and community mental health. The third one, they talked about what's to be gained. The fourth one is what's at risk if you don't do it. And the fifth thing was to grow together. What do you have to start doing, continue doing, and stop doing? 3 simple messages. So out of all that conversation, that huge topic that we were talking about, it came down to a simple infographic like this, where they created this. And then, you know, each one of these could be unpacked into its own infographic. You could take that one on data and make a whole infographic just on that. But for people to come out there and be able to take something simple and be able to talk about it in their own communities, this is the simple template that they used. So what was really interesting was when I asked them to put the statement at the top, what's your grounding statement? And what's going to be the title of this? So they went from really, you could really see who was at these tables, because the people that really had educators that, you know, that wanted to do, they you know, it was all about the importance of PBIS, you know. I thought that's not the point of the infographic that's supposed to be about bridging, right? For the people that were at the mental health table, they were all about the fact that mental health is overarching, right? And the school people felt a little bit, you know, like you're not really giving us the equal play here, right? So even after doing all this, naming it still came down to that. Everybody back in their own, you know, with their own allies. Somebody broke this, and Mark, you might remember this. Somebody really broke this. You know what they said? They came up with this idea. They called it Nobody Alone in the Lone Star State. And that broke the whole thing. There was no way of taking something like that and making it either education or mental health. Nobody alone in the Lone Star State is what they called it. The idea of that, that this is going to translate in different ways, and we all have to be together in it. So this is an example of an infographic. And just again, it kind of shows you how some of these tools are kind of layered on each other. You know, you do the one, then you do the next one, then you do the next one. So, you know, anybody want to weigh in on something like this? I mean, you know, as I'm describing it to you, what kind of thoughts do you have about this? This is not a fancy infographic. You can do some really fancy ones, but we wanted to do something at that they could leave with at that meeting, right? And this is what we were able to do so that we could bring it together in that short amount of time. So anybody have any thoughts on this one? As I was describing it, any thoughts that came to you about this?
I love it. I mean, I'm visual, so I really like it. And I've never thought about it in terms of when you're bringing groups together or people of diverse perspectives together to have them, you know, complete an infographic. You know, in my world, it's always been around one topic and one set of data. So yeah, I liked it. Yeah, you just like blew the top off my head right now. So,
so you know, it's not that you can't do an infographic that is already developed. I mean, one of the things that I showed them in Michigan was, you know, we don't have time with the amount of things that you have to change. One of the things we might do is pick an infographic that somebody else developed and start using it to create this dialogue, right? So the idea of co-creation is that you're choosing together. It's not as good as making your own, but you know, you can also do that. right? So, but the key here is what I'm going to show you next. Oh, okay. So we have another one here. So let's talk about this idea of infographics. We're gonna expand on it a little bit, but just using this idea of infographics because they're so popular now. To what extent do you see using something like this in a co-creation kind of format? Do you see using something like this in your work? Because there are a ton of these infographic websites that are really simple. You know, what used to be something you'd have to go out to a graphic designer for, you now can do on an infographic site, and it was beautiful, you know? So let's take a look here. We're at 17, couple more people. I don't see anybody doing anything right now. So again, you know, most people are saying that they are likely to try something like this, and the second highest is very likely. So that's great. This idea of using these infographics really gives you this chance to try co-creation. You know, it's really kind of an energizing sort of activity. But again, somebody knows something about why we wouldn't do this, and put it in the chat or just unmute and talk to us if you're comfortable with that, because it is kind of important to know why you feel that it's unlikely that you would do it. And maybe it's just your situation. That's okay. But if there's something that you really think, you know, we'd encourage you to share it with us. That would be wonderful. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So these infographics are the first step, because once you got your infographic created, that can be expanded to such a power by adding to it what we call a dialogue guide. So I don't know if you got the samples of the dialogue guides. We used an infographic to create a story about dialogue guides. And if you didn't get that before today, then we'll send it out to you right after today, okay? But this idea of creating a dialogue guide, I'm going to go through this piece pretty quick, but this idea of creating a dialogue guide is to really get people to be able to express, you know, some of their initial thoughts about something, and then after that's out, to get them to, you know, be able to say, okay, given everything we said, you know, how can we start moving on something here, right? So in Georgia, they use these dialogue guides that I'm going to talk to you about. And what they do is to say that there's no crosstalk, that you have to be in the group and you got to listen to everybody before you either question somebody or follow up on that. Everybody's got to talk first. So the first kind of questions that we create, and you can hold the dialogue guide, but having this session where you co-create those kinds of questions is also an important thing. So the first kind of questions to create are reaction questions. And these are to like make the people's, what they're thinking, you know, explicit, just explaining it, right? So, you know, they have to be shaped in a way that they're not inflammatory, that's for sure, but they've got to go to what people think. So we give people some starters, some samples of the things that they might ask. And so here's a sample of a STEM question. Now, you know, I just did this with the Military Child Education Coalition. They're using dialogue guides on important issues. And in fact, they've changed their national training seminar to have these questions where first we hear from an expert, then we build the infographic, then we do the dialogue. And we've done it for 3 years now. First we did ADHD, we did early childhood mental health, and we did depression, anxiety and depression in adolescents. Those three are the three that we've done with the Mental Health Coalition. So the idea there is that they've included into something that they call leave your footprint on whatever it is, leave your footprint on ADHD. And the idea is the people that are there, just as I was trying to explain about this idea of, you know, taking this work into your networks, the Military Child Coalition, the people that are attending the training seminars are in military bases in every branch of the service all over the country. So if they co-create something and take it back to their training station, I mean, they're all stationed all over the country, and it changes frequently. If you take it wherever you go and you use it wherever you go, gradually you get a change in what people know and do about a situation. And in their case, what they've tried to do is get the commanding officers to create a space, the wives of the commanding officers, to create a space for, if you've been involved in one of these sessions, they'll give you a spotlight to actually show some of this work. And they call that effort, from the things we've done at the 3 summer meetings, they call it leave your footprint on ADHD. The idea is wherever you go, you're bringing that infographic and that dialogue guide with you. And gradually, people's knowledge and people's beliefs will change over time. So here are some of the STEM, you'll see if you pick up one of the ones that's on their website, you'll see they actually took these stems and used them. So some of the stems are really simple for the reaction questions. Why is it important to you in terms of programs and services? Why is it important, this issue, in terms of relationships between, you fill in the blanks, between who and who? In your experience, what about this issue? What do your colleagues say about? These are simple things that you can choose to use for dialogue guides. And the idea here is that if you have a group of maybe 15, 20 people, and you have to listen to everybody in that group make a statement about one of these before you can do the crosstalk, your conversation is so much more informed and so much deeper in terms of actually building and validating each other's experiences. The second kind of question you create in a dialogue guide are these application questions, thinking about the future state of practice. So for the application starters, here are some of the recommendations. Again, if you look at the military ones, they took them verbatim, these recommendations. Recall a time when, then you just fill it in, whatever happened. How might this new knowledge that we just created change that story? You know, how might some stakeholder group be expected to respond to this new information? You know, where is this new information going to be put in practice? And how might some particular stakeholder group be better prepared to understand the changes? These are simple things that you can do around any topic. And when you do that with something like we're doing with the military, where you take a panel of experts, the stakeholders listen to them, they co-create the infographic, simply digesting their information, and then they create the dialogue guide that they then take into their networks. So this is the strategy for connecting infographics and dialogue guides. And one of the things right now, and I'm making the invitation to you right now, to go back on that one, I don't know, Jamal, either I can't move it or it moves too fast. I don't know. But here we go. So this is a current effort that's using this strategy. And I'm inviting everybody on the line to, if you want to be invited in this, you're in, okay? But a couple years ago, SAMHSA held 3 expert panels on what does it mean to have comprehensive school mental health. And so they created a stakeholder informed, on these expert panels, all stakeholders, guide that you can get off the internet now, and I'll send you that in the follow-up email. But the idea was, what are you going to do with this? There's no one center that you can fund to create a tipping point on this. You have to use the natural connections among people. So they're using this dialogue strategy where we're creating dialogue guides based on pieces of that guide. And various groups are then taking it into their networks, just like the military did, taking it into their networks, taking it into their meetings, taking it into their web dialogues, whatever. So here's an example, and I'll send you the whole thing. But here's an example of one of the guides that a group created that were the expert panels could invite people from their networks to shape this. And so the people that came did the first one. And the first one they did was from this statement that's right in the front of the guide about partnerships. And so the very first dialogue guide that we created was about what does it actually mean to cross the boundaries of schools and mental health to create a partnership. The identities of those people are so different, yet they're in the same work. So this first dialogue guide in this series, this is the first one that's out there, co-created by the stakeholders, is can we acknowledge that these identities of these people are different? Different things form their identities, and that's important to doing this work together. So this is just the first piece of this. I will send you the entire one that was just created. And this is the first example of what we're going to do. So if you want to be in this work, if you want to create these, co-create these dialogue guides that people will be using nationally, I'm inviting you in that now. I will make sure you get invited to all the future work. All you have to do is give Jamal and Mark your name, and we'll definitely make sure that you're included in that work. So this is an example right now of what's happening with this dialogue guide strategy. And then to beyond just creating the dialogue guides, to activate the networks of the people that are in this work. And so I will also send you what we're using in this national work to take the networks that are in place, and to tell them, how are you going to take what we create and take it into your network, right? So this is actually an infographic that we created together that just tells them how this is what we plan to do, on how this is going to actually make a difference. So of course this is just a screenshot what I could get on the screen, but I will make sure you get the whole thing. So you know, one interesting thing about this was that one of the groups that is interested in, you know, we use the tool which I gave to you in the beginning, the circles, where the core team, the key partners, the extended networks, the dissemination networks. That's what we're using to plan which groups are, who wants to do what. We're not telling them what they have to do. They can choose what they want to do in one of those circles, but this is the way that we have it rolling out. So, so one of the interesting things was one of the groups, national groups that we talked to about this, they signed on as a national group to do this, but one of their state networks have their own network, and they expect that national conference to be in their state next year. So they want their state to be the leader in actually doing this before the rest of the country gets there, and then they'll be the keynote. So you can see how, you know, creating an activity like this and keeping this work going, doing this kind of stuff gives people the spotlight. It gives them a chance to be in the spotlight, and they don't have to know everything to be in that spotlight. They can just be, they can be in the spotlight because they volunteered to participate. So that's what the point of this is. It's about the task, but it's more about the relationship going forward. So that, so now I talked to you about dialogue guides and infographics and combining the two. So let me just see what you think about this. So I gave you a couple of examples, local examples, military examples, and this national SAMHSA example. So what do you think? In your work, what's the likelihood that you might do this co-creation of dialogue guides, whether or not you link it with infographics, but can you see yourself developing these dialogue guides as a feature of your work? What do you think? Let's put that poll up. So tell me, what do you think? What do you think? Can you see yourself using dialogue guides in this work? We're at about 18. I think that's probably about what we've been getting, 18. All right, there we are. So again, we got that people can see they're likely, very likely, possibly. So we're kind of down there. But again, you know, somebody knows a reason why this is not a good thing. And, you know, you don't have to say it publicly, but I would really, it would be useful for me if you could send that after the information, after the call, If you don't see this as being something that would be useful, or, you know, maybe you're just thinking that it's unlikely in your own environment, I don't know, but if it is something about the strategy itself, I would really like to know about that. So please feel free to let me know. In fact, it would be a favor to me if you did. Okay. All right. Last tool for today. And let me see how much time I have left. Ooh, a little bit of time anyway. So I'm going to show you this tool. And this one, you know, this one, I'll tell you, is one that if you decide to use this tool, you're going to be surprised at it is so simple. And what you can get out of this is so amazing that if you give it a try, I think you'll like it. So here's the tool in your book. When you get your book, which Jamal is just waiting for a couple more addresses to mail those out. When you get your book, this is what it looks like in the book, okay? So all the directions are there and everything. I'm just going to give you the highlights of it. So the first thing that you do is you take a look at some core activities of any kind of partnership, and you assign a shape and a color to them, all right? Now, at one point, when we first started doing this, it was easy to buy Post-its in these shapes and these colors. It is not so easy now, so I had them printed. I had them done by a company, and I have them done in pads of 10, so that if you're at a table, you know, you have them to use. So if you're interested in this, if you like this idea, when you're sending Jamal your address to mail your book to him, tell him to send you some of these too. I'll send them to Jamal, and he can send them out to you if you request them, okay? But let me just tell you this story about this tool. So we were trying to look for a way that people could tell a story or have the elements of a story that needed to be captured without the typical way that you do that, where you're asking people to write narratives and all kinds of stuff. So we took a simple activity, butcher paper on the wall, and we asked them to, you know, for some groups, it was just 1 year, so we just used a flip chart. But other years, they were telling a multi-year story, so we used a long thing on the wall. And we asked them at their tables they had a pad like this of 10 things and 10 Post-its, and to ask them to describe relationships, activities, accomplishments, driving forces with an arrow going one way, restraining forces, an arrow going the other way, and just to put them up. And so you can see at the tables, they're just, I mean, the interest and the level of people taking and writing things down on these Post-it notes, asking for more, asking across the table, I want to do one, I want to do one. They're not, you know, you're not doing it fast enough. Here, let me have some, I'll write them down. You know, you get some energy going here in a way that you don't get if you're just asking people to write narratives or take a poll, right? Or take a survey. This was a very active kind of situation. Could we do this through a survey? Absolutely. Would it generate this kind of interest? Never. So we were just lucky we fell into it. So now here's where they are. They're putting all this, they're just defining what kind of relationships had meaning, what activities had meaning. And these are all things that you can follow up on in interviews or whatever. But the idea is to get a holistic sense of what has value to your stakeholders. And so here's an example from Pennsylvania. This was done in 2014, right about the time when we were, and actually this is the example of where this tool came from. We were right around 2014 when Leading by Convening was being introduced. We tried this, and we did it with the Pennsylvania Community of Practice on Transition. For those of you that have been involved in the Healthy Transitions program under SAMHSA and under OMSOS, you're probably in this community of practice right now. They have their annual community of practice meeting at Penn State every summer. This was the beginning of that community, okay? So they were telling the story of how they emerged over years. Now, you know, like, what do you think when you look at something like this? I mean, if this was up on the wall, you know, and this is what you saw, what would you say about this as the information from this meeting? Anybody? What would you say if you saw this at a meeting? What would you say? Anybody have any thoughts about what that would say to you? If you saw that that as the example. Nobody?
There was certainly more going on, or they were willing to share more.
Absolutely. That's a great, absolutely. So you can see that here's what they said. Look, if you go all the way back here to before 2008, when they really became a community, they had a lot of relationships, but you know, some things were restraining change, some things were driving change, and they did a few things together. So they had the relationships, but they weren't doing anything with it. Then they got a little bit more formal, and they started doing some things together, and they did a little more, and they did a little more. And then right here, something happened right here where it was an explosion of activities, drawing more people in. You see all those hearts on there, new relationships with new people. And by the time you got to 2013, you see just a mass of stuff that everybody thought was happening. So if you're just looking at this in terms of energy, that's one thing. If you were looking at it in terms of how the activities, the things that you would formally evaluate grew along with the relationships, you can certainly see it as you get over here. The more relationships they had, the more stuff they had going on, the more stars they had for accomplishments, the more that they continued to do this stuff. Take a look at this. In the face of restraining forces, they still were able to do all of that stuff. Now, this is the stuff they said to each other. Then you know what they did? They started taking these apart and they started lining them up, like all the relationships, all the activities. And this is where their evaluators went in to find out, this is what people value. What's the story here that we need to tell, right? That's how this tool started, Pennsylvania Community of Practice on Transition, okay? So let me show you how it developed over time. Now here's a 2019 example. This is Ohio. This is their statewide literacy team, which has got like families and schools and TA providers and universities. And so take a look. I mean, you see the difference between when they first did it and it was just the energy of it. And here it's very, I mean, you could see, they see the value of this. It's all co-created. But look at this. When you decide what the story is going to be that you're going to tell around something like this, you know, you've got, and then if you look at this big, you can see they not only wrote this down, but they started writing on the thing to connect these things. You see how they wrote here and they wrote there. And if I showed you some of the others, there's some people that at this same meeting, there were 22 states at this meeting. Some of them have, the whole background is filled with like notes, this, arrows, you know, make sure you note that this happened there. Make sure you know that this would have happened differently if, you know, I mean, there was a lot there to be able to tell a story of what happened, right? Let's go back to that Texas meeting I was telling you about. Okay, this is the group of regional support teams. One of these regional support teams was at the mental health meeting, right? One of them. But they have 20 of them, and some of them are as big as states, right? And so they're trying to change the impression that the state is not telling people what to do, that they're learning with the state, right? A very leading by convening kind of idea, that the state is learning with them at this time. So they did this activity and they were talking about, you know, what they were doing to actually make this happen. And so they identified, you can see it, they didn't do just one, they did two. They did one that was up to this point and one moving forward. So up to this point, they lined up all the things that they had done to try to change this impression out in the field, that the state was not just sitting up there, you know, trying to tell them what to do, but they were actually going to be partners with them, right? And then here's what they did. And then they're saying, based on all the stuff we saw here, that across all these 20, this is the first time all 20 of them were, you know, really together thinking about this. what are we going to do as a group going forward? So they did this one. I want you to see something take on. Let me just see if you see it. What do you really see on between up to this point and moving forward? Anybody pick anything out there?
All of the arrows moving forward.
Exactly. When they were thinking about what they have to actually up to this point, look at this right here. Up to this point, look at this. All the arrows were things that were against them. They're all pointing backwards. That means they're restraining forces, right? Only 2 positives going forward. Look over here. Look over here. After they all got together and decided, where the value is, you got the same 4 arrows going backwards, but look at all the positives that they developed by working together over what they're going to do. So now, this, you might say, you could do the same thing, just giving them a worksheet, have the conversation. Absolutely you could. But if you could be in a room where people are slapping these things up, they're going, this is falling down, give me some tape, somebody's handing them this and that. If you can see the enthusiasm, the interest, the movement when they do something like this, it's not that you cannot do this in another form. You absolutely can get get it in another form. But can you get the enthusiasm by doing it in that kind of format? If you saw this, I think you would know that you can't. It's a simple activity, and the point of having them do it is that they would take these things and that they would start doing it with the districts that they work in. That they would model being different to the districts. Up to this point, they were coming in, oh, the state's here to help. Yeah, right, they were coming in doing something like this. Nobody had ever seen the state act like that before. They might give them a chance to believe that they wanted to be different, right? So that was what they were capitalizing on. The day that we did this, the next morning, the person came in and said, can I have 15 of those? I'm running a meeting next week and I really need to do that because these people don't trust me, And so I gave her 15 sets of these to take to the meeting in one of these places that's probably about as big as some of our states, so that she could show that she could try to show that she was doing something in a different way. So this is quick chronology of change. And, it's not just the energy of this at the meeting. You create value stories from this activity. And, I was listening, I was driving the other day and I had I don't know how I got this on, but I had the Wharton School Business Network was on the Sirius XM. And the guy there was talking about the power of stories, that stories are what make things clear to people. And so I thought, hey, you know what? We've always focused on stories, but this idea of writing a value story, what did you learn about something that's got value to your partners in a simple way that you might not have known? What big ideas emerged, just like this idea of how much they had going forward in Texas? And what are the stories that ought to be captured? That girl that took these things to actually have a different relationship with a district that didn't trust what they were saying, that story needs to be captured, right? There's a lot of stuff to learn there. So this is the value of these kinds of activities. So, okay, one more poll, last poll. So do you see yourself using quick chronology in your work? What do you think? Something like this, even if it's not this, if you want them, I have the things for you. Do you see yourself ever doing something like that? Okay, this time, Diana says there's 2 unlikely. 2 unlikelies? Oh, very unlikely. That's supposed to be very likely. Oh, that bottom one is very likely. You're right. Diana, typo, thank you. I'll fix that. So it starts out very unlikely and it goes to very likely. But again, we see that the, oh, I see what you're saying. It's supposed to be somewhat likely. Yeah, somewhat unlikely, possibly, likely. Yeah, okay. So it's gradations there. You're right. Yeah. So we'll change that. But we get to this idea again that that a pretty good number of people see themselves doing something like this. So let me just offer, if you want more training on any of these, any particular tools, if you want to start a group where you use it and you tell each other, like, you know, here's how I did it, here's what I would recommend, you know, we can support some of that. And actually, in the next 2 months, in July, August, and September, I'm going to run sessions hour-long session where somebody brings us a problem, and then the whole group, peer sort of, you know, peer coaches, gives them some advice on what to do, including maybe using one of these tools, okay? So we'll make sure you get that information too. So this is good. We had another group that feels that some of these things are likely for them. Great. I want to just show you before, because we only have a minute or two here before we leave. Oops, one more. Okay, so your books are coming in the mail. I have to thank you for your participation today. You were great. And I think that the diversity in terms of your responses showed that you didn't try to just make me feel good about it. So that's good. That's important. And if the person that thinks that that stuff was unlikely, I would value knowing what you think. Okay. So, you know, somebody saw this in a different way, and we got to respect that because they know something we need to know. So the books are in the mail. Many of the tools are in the book, but there's a lot more tools in the book. And some of them are really, would be really useful for you to take a look at. Page 70 in the book has a tool called What's in It for Me, where you're kind of learning, you know, what's in it for the people that are in your collaboration. Page 83 gives you, is a tool called Building Engagement, and it's a lot of ideas for how you can invite many people to participate in things, right? And then there's two there that are really quite important. They Give Value First has a quote from a organizational theorist, and it says, enter a collaboration as if you're already partners. Enter the collaboration as if you're already partners. And it asks you to think what that behavior of entering as if you're already a partner, that you're not new, what it means right from the beginning of a collaboration. So it's an interesting one. Take a look at that one. And then the other one that I would recommend to you is actually kind of thinking about your brand. Do you have a brand, right? Do you as an individual have a brand? Does the organization that you belong to have a brand? And is that brand perceived in the same way that you want it to be perceived? So it's a branding tool taken from business and applied to this kind of work, okay? Now in the back of each book, there is, actually I have it here someplace. There, in the back of each book, there is a USB. I'll show it to you in a second here. Oh, sorry, should have had this ready, sorry. But in the back of each book is a USB on the back cover. This looks like a credit card. It's not, it's a USB. And the little thing you stick in your computer flips out from that. Let me just get it out here for you and show you. It's a, this is the last session we have together. It might be a little tough to get this one out. But the idea here is that you have Leading by Convening to go. You'll never need the internet to reach any of these tools. This book allows you to, or this USB allows you to take Leading by Convening with you. See, the little thing you stick in your computer, pull, sticks up right from this. This is a USB, okay? And you can take any of these tools, you can fill them out, you can save them. Everything is fillable on here. All of the contents of the book are on here as well. And it's available for you. And then the last thing I'll say is if you want any of these shapes to do the chronology tool, let Jamal know, and I will make sure that we send those to you, okay? So thanks everybody for your participation today. and your participation over time. I hope this was useful to you, and I'm looking forward to working with you in the future. Thanks, everybody.